It has been a few weeks since our cameras have visited Wildlands Zoo. Spring has given way to summer and the guest counts have continued to rise, as well as the zoo finances. Despite this, a certain Lord Coltham is not happy. His impatience is about to run over in his desire to hop on a plane and begin searching for new species of animals for the zoo. He is being held back, however, by the lack of progress on our South American building. With the new inhabitants already waiting and in quarantine, the final push is on to get our indoor habitat complete. Changes have to be made, however. As we found with our previous build, we need far more space than was originally planned. With that in mind, the contractors are given direction to expand the third and final habitat out onto the land behind the building. It's there today that we will begin expanding the indoor habitat across the guest path into a much bigger wetland area behind our building. We're going to redevelop the guest path as well as finishing up our backstage area within the main building, and by the end of today our South American building will be complete, at least on the inside. Before we jump on in, however, if at any point you enjoy this video, make sure to tippy tap the like button. Today's emoji is the monkey. Make sure you pop it in the comments below, all for the sake of engagement. And with that complete, let's swing on in to the build. Welcome back to Wildlands Zoo. It has been a while. The Barnyard DLC dragged us away for a little bit, but we are back at it and we are going to get our big South American building finished up. At least today, we're going to get the inside habitat finally completed. We have this big third of our giant Amazon rainforest experience, we could call it, that is yet to be finished, so we're going to use that. And I've learnt my lesson from the dwarf caiman habitat, and we are going to extend this outside, double the space of the habitat, make an indoor and outdoor area for our mixed species rainforest animals. Now, what animals do I hear you ask? Well, we are going to bring in the capybara, we're going to have the collared peccary, the Baird's tapir, and the capuchin monkey. Quite a mixture, all of them giving enrichment to each other, and also gives us the opportunity to make ourselves a Pantanal style habitat, much like you can find in places like the Houston Zoo. To do that, we're going to extend our water out and under the pathway into this outer area here. I'm going to build up the sides of this area so they're nice and high, and then we can make some giant islands of foliage in the middle, and these will just give our habitat a bit of height, as well as lead on to further habitats off the back of this exhibit much further down the line as we move into another thematic area just behind. More on that later on in the video. And I'm going to build these out, raise these up, and then just design a little bit of a water access. And most of our land animals, so basically all of the animals in the habitat aside from the capuchin monkey, will be accessing this via walking or swimming across, and then we're going to make a rope bridge for our monkeys to get across. Jumping onto the inside now, we're going to start finishing off what we started in one of our very first few episodes, this wonderful rocky wall that surrounds our entire Amazon habitat, and we're going to build ourselves an outlet for a waterfall. I wanted a nice sort of water barrier just to stop our capuchin monkeys climbing all over this wall and getting into all of the other habitats. In reality, there isn't a major issue why these can't all sustain together, but planetzoo will not allow me. So we're just going to make a little guttering chute, and then we're going to fill it with some waterfall animations, and as you can see there, it just tumbles down wonderfully. Jumping onto rock work then, we're going to keep this fairly simple inside because we don't have much land left over. We're just going to use some of these much larger mossy rocks to create a nice land barrier, stop our normal ground creatures climbing over into the other habitats. And then outside, we're going to run around our land area just a line of tropical and temperate rocks, just to give that more of a fake feeling to the way that the land has been terraformed. Now, you'll see in the background some mud walls. Ignore these. I am going to replace them. I didn't like how they turned out, and we'll come on to that very shortly. Meanwhile, around the areas of the pathway, we're going to jump back to just getting the guests all set up with more land barriers and blocking in some sight lines, as well as creating a bit of an area that the animals can't escape from. Now, this change kind of highlights a little bit of a difference in how I'm now going to be designing some of the habitats in Wildlands. I'm going to do a much bigger video when we do a tour of this area and just sort of go into the future plans. However, in the next couple of weeks, you will be seeing quite a change on how we do things with our planetzoo content. This being one of them, in that I want to start bringing in more guest-focused habitats, as well as more guest-focused design, where we start looking into maybe a little bit less natural and perhaps just a bit more zoo-like, where areas that are very clearly not real look not real. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that, and I also think it may end up being just that tad more realistic in relation to a real zoo. I'm also planning in the next couple of weeks, we're popping over to Chester. I will be popping a couple of pictures, etc. up on the community tab, so stay tuned for that. Following that trip, we will be doing a complete renovation of the zoo as it currently stands, and you'll be able to see how that suddenly becomes a lot more both realistic but also fake. Now I've rebuilt the path and we're just going to build it into a bit more of a bridge. Again, just following that idea of going into something a little bit more guest experience wise. We're not going to try and disguise this as an old stone bridge. No, this is going to be a nice industrial metal beam bridge, very much in the style of our glass and wire work that we've done inside. So with that in mind, we're going to make it out of these giant girders. I do end up turning it a little bit more darker in colour. It's quite grey here. Then once we've got that main structure in, we're going to move on to bringing in some finer details, just using some of those little metal bars to make some more struts and structural supports. Again, really happy with how this turned out in the end. Just to finish off the upper surface, we're going to use these vents to make ourselves a nice metal walkway. And this turned out very effective for such a simple little addition. It's just a load of vents lined up with a finishing piece at each end. Now, as we move on to doing a bit more detailing, it's time to start building our capuchin monkey walkway. We're going to start by building a couple of brace poles, and these are going to be used to hold the walkway up. We're going to start off with one of these concrete columns, which I thought suited perfectly. Then we're going to put a giant wooden pole in, and then we're going to use the wheels here to make a little anti-climb device. So this will just stop the monkeys climbing up from the ground and trying to ascend the pole. Just going to duplicate these along, and these are very similar to something I've seen on a couple of concept photos. At the top, we're going to use the brace pulley as somewhere to give ourselves a bit of a weighted anchor, and then we're going to use the braced poles just to attach in a little pivot. Onto that pivot, we're going to put some rope, and this is going to form a coil of steel wire, which later on I'll attach my steel cables to, that are going to hold up our walkway. With our poles finished, we're going to sink them into the ground so that just a little bit of that concrete pole sticks out. We're going to do 4 of them, 1 on each corner, but we're going to slightly angle them at about a 45-degree angle, as they would be if they were holding up something with some weight. Now with the poles in place, we can start building our walkway, and we're going to start off with these climbable pieces. I've tried building walkways with just using normal props before, and I tend to find something always tends to go wrong. So by going with this, even if an area is not traversable, it will still able to be climbed, which should hopefully keep down any of the errors we may encounter, like we did previously with the fox habitat. We're going to build a metal frame along the bottom to support that, and then we're going to drag that metal frame up to make the roof. And then once we've got our frames in place, we can clad them all in some mesh, as well as making some metal supports to run up and down the side of each of our brackets. And then just to add a little bit more detail, I'm going to make these metal poles with some caps on each end sit between our metal struts there. And then what we're going to do with these is we're going to attach some rope, or in this instance some metal cable, and we're going to run that all the way along, connecting each pole, which will give the structure a bit more rigidity. And the idea is that this would be somewhat suspended between these 4 poles, so that as it was moved around by the wind and by the weather, it's not necessarily going to take as much weight or take as much force as it would do if it was more statically attached to the poles. Much rope work later, and we finally have our suspended walkover bridge. This, by pure fluke, just turned out at just the right height so that the guests can see into it without being too low for them to hit their head. Now with that in place, we're going to build ourselves a little faux tree at one end, just so that the capuchins can climb up and onto the walkway. The idea here is because the walls are quite low at the side of the habitat, we don't want to build anything too high so that they could then jump over the walls and escape. So we're keeping this, although it doesn't look it very much in the video here, keeping this quite far away from the edges of the rockwork there. And then on the other side, we're going to make a pole with a nice big concrete footing. Again, this is just so that they don't end up dropping down into the water and trying to climb up on the rock. On top of this, we're going to start putting on some wooden platforms. So I'm going to make a couple of these. These are basically going to allow the monkeys to traverse the water line. They don't have to then get wet. At the top of these poles, again, we're going to put our little anti-climb devices just so they can't climb up and onto the support ropes. Another bracket with another rope coil, and then again off camera, what I will do is just run some cabling from this over to the sides to help it stay upright. With our outdoor climbing apparatus all sorted, we're going to make some faux trees inside for the capuchins to stay on, for example, in the winter months or when it's particularly cold outside. We're going to do this using the faux trees, but we're going to turn them upside down so we've got this nice flat surface. And we're going to sink these into that rock wall at the back there, again, keeping them away from the side of the habitat. We don't want them jumping and escaping. And then in the middle, we're going to make another one, again, just flipping it over on top of itself, setting it down on top of a upright tree. And then we're going to use the little faux footing branches, I'm not too sure what they're called, but by turning these upside down, again, they've got those nice flattened tops, and we can use these tops as platforms for the monkeys to climb on. Finally, just to finish off, a couple of the faux tree branches just to make it look a bit more tree-like. But again, much like we did with the caiman, we don't want this tree looking real. We want it to look fake. It's going to have been put there for a reason. Now, just to link them together, we're going to use the vines inside because they fit the rainforest aesthetic just that little bit better. And we're going to coat all of this tree in them. Now, this habitat turned out with far more climbing than I ever imagined. And they do use it, but it's few and far between because there is just so much to climb on. Now, with all that hard vegetation out the way, it's time to just do a little bit of more relaxed planting. We're going to get some hosta in just to cover over some weed areas. We're going to pop in some more exotic plants within the rainforest area. And also, while I was at it, I thought I'd hide some of these capybara enrichments within the waterfall so that they could sit underneath the waterfall as though they were these taps. I thought these worked out really well, and you'll see in the cinematics at the end that they love using them. Outside, we don't want to go too tropical, so we're going to bring back the wonderful pea shrub. We're going to build this together just to add a nice rough chunk of a darker green, and again using the hosta just to fill out some areas. I also felt like this side of the river was not very helpful for our capuchins, so I'm going to put a small climbing frame on this side, just a couple of those wooden platforms with another faux tree, and then all we're going to do is just connect them together with ropes. Now, what you'll see here, and I've been doing this with most of our rope and steel connections, is we've been placing the ropes in using the planetzoo rope. Then at each end, we've been using some of the LED caps to work as little fixing fasteners, and they do a very good job of tidying up those ends and making it look like they're meant to be connected into stuff. It's a really good effect, and it's something that just those little additions really make me look at it and think, oh yeah, that looks good. I like how that works. Now, as you can imagine, a habitat like this needs copious amounts of buffalo grass, so in we come with our buffalo grass. As you can see there, we've also added these little clumps of the hosta just for some thicker vegetation. We don't want to go too much or too heavy on the vegetation. Inside, we have a lot of plant life, so outside we want to keep it fairly just down to grasses and low-level bushes, and that's pretty much all we're going to do. We're going to pop some buffalo grass round on this side, and then over on the more open area, we're going to go back in with the drier buffalo grass just to add a little bit of a gradient color shift. Mixed with that, we'll bring in some of that darker green, just so you're not looking at one color all the time. And again, the guests are seeing this from afar, so they'll see those colors a lot more intertwined than you will up close like we are on the video here. Now, to add a little bit of variation and also a little bit of height, we're also going to come in with some drin grass, both the green and the dry variant, and this is just going to add a little bit more height. The bit over here is very unlikely to get maintained very often. They're going to need waders to get over there, so it's unlikely that it would ever be sort of mowed down, and it relies on the animals eating the grass to keep it short. As a result, you're going to get these big patches of just thicker, rougher grasses. And with that same instinct in mind, we're also going to bring across some nettles. So again, maintenance on this side of the habitat would not be as often as it would be indoors. So we're likely to get more weeds and more little growths. And again, just a little splodge of green every now and then. Now, away from the animals' reach up on the top of our sort of rocky islands here, we're going to keep this fairly British. After all, we are a British zoo. So off of the back of our Barnyard DLC series and our love of creosote bushes, we're going to start running some hedgerows around the top, and then we're going to bring across some of the bigger trees just to fill that background in. And you'll see in the cinematics, I've also done the same on the outside of the fences. The last leg of today's video is going to be our backstage, and we're going to reuse the metal fencing that we used for our spectacle caiman builds a few weeks back now. We're going to alter it a little bit. We're going to drop some of that mesh down and just bring in a glass section on the upper half. Again, we have animals that are able to climb and we don't want them climbing over the top of the fencing. And we're going to run that down the full forward width of our habitat. On this side, the left hand side, that will be where our bigger animals will sleep, so we don't need to go too high with it there. But on the opposite side, we'll have our capuchin area, and that's also going to get itself an extra level of glass. To cover over the main doorway, we're going to bring back our PVC curtain, and then we'll also frame out the inside. And we'll do this with most of the doors in our backstage area here. Put in a wonderful aluminium shutter that will lower and close when they want to keep the animals inside the backstage areas. And much like our other doors, we're going to bring back our little control box, and we're going to run our cabling along the ceiling and down to the outside of the habitat so that the keepers can close it from outside. In the capuchin area, we're going to build ourselves a little metal platform, and this will be where they can climb on top of and sleep. And then we're going to just run a couple of climbable platforms around the inside of the enclosure, as well as build them a little climbing frame just in case they ever have to be kept inside. This area is secure off so that the bigger animals cannot get to it. And what you won't see me build, because it was a lesson in tedium, was a outer exit just for the capuchins where they can run through a little tunnel and climb out and in of their backstage area. And that just stops the capybara and all of the other animals getting into this area and using their bed space. There's not quite anything currently in place to stop the capuchins using the capybara bed space, but that's just planetzoo for you. I finished up this back area with some straw, as well as building a couple of metal frames just to support our climbing platforms. It's kind of not really needed. The amount of climbing space we have in this habitat already, we are already by and far much more than the capuchins ever need, but it was just nice to have this little indoor backstage climbing area that we could potentially bring the capuchins into. Over on the other side, we're just going to plop some straw on the floor and a water bowl down. They don't really need much in here. The reality is, even if we were to close off the outside area, they'd still have the entirety of our rainforest habitat inside nicely warm and heated, so the likelihood of them ever being stuck in here is relatively nil. And with that done, let's bring in our animals. This one has been quite the build, took quite a large amount of time, and it isn't quite finished either. I did want to get some educational panels in, as well as some music and a bit more guest landscaping. I will save that for our tour video. We do, however, still have one more habitat to make inside of our giant South American building. That being said, something for you all to consider. The poll will be going up, as mentioned, this week for what we should call this place, and then following next week's builds, we will do a walk around tour where I'll unveil the winner of the name. I also have quite an announcement for what we're going to do with the rest of the zoo going forward, so stay tuned for that. That will be also part of our tour video. And as mentioned, I am jetting off up the road to Chester in a week or two, so I will come back with some wonderful ideas and some wonderful advancements for our zoo, which we're going to be putting in over the next couple of months. It has been an absolute delight to finally be back in a proper zoo, designing proper zoo habitat. I have so many thoughts and ideas on what I want to bring to Wildlands, and we're going to have such a great time over the next couple of months just seeing all that come together. However, I really want to hear your feedback. What do you think about our new habitat? What do you think about Wildlands Zoo, and what can you not wait to see? And as South America draws to a close, we will be looking to venture into other thematic areas, and I'll be looking to you all for choices and voting on where we go next with Wildlands Zoo. If you've enjoyed the creation today, if you've enjoyed the episode today, make sure you tippy tap that like button. If you're not subscribed, subscribe down below. I will see you next week with our final habitat of our South American building. See you then. Bye, guys.